from mental health, the youth mental health survey. So those are what I would start with.
And would you put
Yeah,
those?
I go ahead, Jay.
I was just going to say, would you put those underneath the first question? What is the policy and what is it trying to achieve?
I'll be right back. I got to let a dog in. Sorry.
Okay.
No.
I was
I'm
looking
listening.
at what data will we review and why.
Yeah,
So I
that's what
would
I thought.
review,
Like cut and
yeah,
paste what-
like,
and put it down
yeah.
there. That's
So I
what
would
I
review course offerings, um, you know, performance, academic performance, chronic absenteeism, youth mental health.
you see that. Can you see what anything that's missing from what he put? I just copied it over. Let's add
I think,
absenteeism.
yeah. I would like to look at, as we think about resources, like the extent to which schools have access to kind of math coaches, reading coaches, behavior intervention support. So I call those kind of specialized educational resources.
Do we want something in there? Excuse me, around MTSS coordination or anything like that?
I think it'd be good. I wonder if we've been looking a lot at our special education data and kind of the use of separate schools. Are we seeing patterns across the state? So maybe special education indicators.
Does that capture it? Data placement of
Yeah.
student.
I think so.
I mean, I'm going to switch this in a little different direction.
Sure.
This is all, and I'm not saying this is wrong. It's sort of the traditional way we look at schools and school quality. And yet I've been reading a fair bit from Raj Chetty, formerly out of Harvard, now Stanford, who talks about,
He's doing some really cool work and economic social mobility work. Really cool. Yeah.
Right. And he's saying we're teaching and testing the wrong stuff. And those are my simplistic way of understanding his work, and it's much more complex, obviously. But the non-cognitive skills, and how do we teach and test for that or assess that?
Transferable skills.
Soft skills.
Future ready skill.
Future ready, yeah.
Yeah. And so a lot of these are cognitive, what we've got down, and I think some way, at least acknowledging that we should be teaching and assessing non-cognitive skills.
Yeah. Yeah, and I if there's one silver lining, I have to run on optimism or else can't get up every day. With the Trump administration is that it seems like we'll have more flexibility with how we really manage our accountability. And so there's an opportunity there for us to think about how we are evaluating school quality. I think this is the time to bring in that conversation around how do we really capture those future ready skills, collaboration, critical thinking, cooperation, skills we know will be important for kids regardless of what job they take on, because we don't know what the jobs of the future will look like, right? I mean, that's the big piece. And there's some interesting work happening. I think there's been a push recently to say those aren't soft skills, those are the real skills, right?
Correct.
Right. And they're really hard to measure. I was at a conference, it was back in the summer, looking at how do we actually evaluate and measure that. I think there's some new instruments that are being piloted in other states. It just might be something for us to look at, but it's still hard to measure, right? And I think I think we'd learn a lot from a pilot, but I would worry about us making
sweeping changes
based on early data from that, because I think it's going to be so new and kind of bleeding edge for us to capture that well. But I agree.
It's incredibly interesting to think about in an academic setting. It must be not. I read his stuff and I think, oh, what a great job just sitting in the ivory tower.
Right.
Um,
Great
and
idea. How are we going to do it and implement it now?
yeah, how does the rubber meet the road on that one?
Yeah, for sure.
I put
Yeah.
in looking at how we evaluate those non-hard quantitative content. Does that kind of capture what we're saying there?
Yeah. I would say something like, I think this kind of future readiness, future ready skills. Um, I mean, we haven't even in the state of Vermont yet really talked about AI at a large level, right? I know every district and school is managing AI and we have some guidance from the state level, but like when we think about AI, what does that look like? What are the opportunities to leverage that? Um, I mean, we've been talking a lot too. I think what can be really exciting about being in the state of Vermont is we can create this kind of beautiful balance of educating students in a way that they're really connected to the land and to and have environmental stewardship and appreciate kind of the small town aspects of Vermont while still having access to the biggest cutting edge high tech and kind of virtual cultural experiences across the globe, right? Like there's this really interesting opportunity I think we have before us to connect those two things, giving our kids roots and wings, at the same time. And how can we leverage technology to do that and kind of outdoor learning and all these other things that I think are really going to be important to build a well-rounded educational experience for kids. It's weird how it's interesting to think how technology can play a role in that without taking away from kind of working with your hands and being in the environment and being immersed in um, the outdoors.
Yeah.
So I think one of the challenges we have is we're not measuring some of this, right? Like, so some data we have and some data we don't have. And maybe that's what we have to call out is that we have data that is really measuring more traditional sense of school quality. And I would say even there, we have some gaps, as you all know, in terms of data integrity across the state, but still, it's a place to start. And then I
Yeah.
think we have some qualitative data around these other skills that are a starting point for the conversation. Yeah.
Yeah.
So really, what is
Yeah. I mean,
what's the
I've not read
policy?
any. Go ahead, Jay.
What's
Go.
I'm sorry. I mean, saying what's the first thing is what's the policy that we're really talking about here? And we're talking about improving quality for kids, right?
Yeah.
Period. So under that first step one, it's all about improving quality for kids. Quality and opportunities.
And I would say equity. I mean, and I do understand the concerns with changing governance, right? But there is something about really being able to achieve equity when you are taking ownership of a broader group of students, right? But there's fear that that's not going to be done in a way that's advocating for locals, right? Like, and I get the tension there,
There's
but
tension.
yeah, the equity is really, to me, an important aspect of this. And equity means that more resources go where there's greater needs, right? Like that's fundamentally.
Right. There is that picture of three kids watching a baseball
Right.
game.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
We've
Yep.
all seen it. We've all, so.
Yeah. The other thing I think about, and Jeff, this would probably resonate with you from a teacher perspective, like, you know, positioning Vermont as the place that is the coveted job for teachers. It is where every teacher wants to work, right? And we see that because we have high teacher retention. We see that because we have long lists of qualified teachers applying for every job we ever have open, right? And so thinking about like
Uh,
how do we actually create that environment, right? It's money is a part of it, but it's also the support, right? How
we don't have a lot of applicants for jobs these days.
No,
Jay,
I
correct
know,
me
but
if I'm
I'm
wrong.
thinking future state, like if this policy can help us, right? Like, so there's something about like how are
Oh,
we known as a state for being the place where every teacher wants to work? Like across the country, Vermont is the place that a teacher wants to work, and they want to stay here because they're supported, they're paid a competitive wage, they're treated like a professional, right? Like, I think our policy should help to achieve that.
Yeah,
And it's
I
not
don't
just
disagree.
pay, right?
I have,
Yeah.
just so you know, I've heard from more than one, it feels like a lot, but it's probably not that many teachers who have come from out of state in the last, since the pandemic.
Yeah.
And they are anxious, scared, concerned about changes they're hearing about. And I'm not any change, right? I mean, they came to this state 5 years ago, whatever it was, wanting to educate their own children and work in school systems, much as you just described, Zoe, where they felt appreciated and treated as a professional and et
Yeah.
cetera. And they're feeling the earth shake underneath their feet. And they're very concerned. Wait a second, I came from Georgia, California, Florida, Texas that I've talked to recently, and one couple, they were both teachers, and they are so concerned that we're changing, and they feel like, wait a second, you're stopped from doing that, right? You made a promise to me, you got me here under false pretense, and now you're changing it, and it's genuine.
No, it's a definite fear. It was interesting because I was having a similar conversation with superintendents. And, I'm a transplant to Vermont for all of those same reasons, right? And so it's interesting. I think there's definitely a group, there's of what I would call kind of new Vermonters, right? New transplants who have come here because of how it is different, right? And the promise of that allowing for more creativity and more kind of engagement with the student. And all of those things are reasons why I came here too. And I think what's challenging is what I see from a statewide view is not every district is able to deliver on that. And I think you all see that too. And so how
Right.
do we start to shift that and say, we do cherish that and we're trying to make that happen everywhere in the state, right? That's it's tough because I've been getting emails too, like as someone from another state, I'm like, I get it. That's why we all came here, right? Like there's this promise of, what Vermont is and what also we could be. But I think because of the real funding constraints, there are parts of our state that are not able to deliver on that. And I think folks that are in environments that are probably operating more at scale in Vermont don't see it. And that's okay. That's not their view. But I do think it's, to your point, I think it's important to acknowledge the fear, right? And that feeling of like, why would we want to change when we feel that these are the great things? And what we're trying to do is preserve and protect those things that make Vermont special and make sure that they're accessible across the state. But
Right. I mean, and what I
yeah,
also hear too is, I heard from a parent in CVU and really upset that they've had what, 80 or so, 88 cuts over the last 2 years
they've
in
had a
staff.
tremendous number of cuts. Yeah.
Right. And so they're
Burlington, yeah.
Burlington too, Jay?
South Burlington. I hear from them all the
South
time.
Burlington. Yeah, yeah. And so
And
the
they're
people
already
in
at
Chittenden
scale.
County are saying, wait a second, we're at scale. I look at the numbers in any discussions taking place in Montpelier, and we're there. Why then are we suffering consequences as a result of doing what you asked us to do? Right. With that,
You
that's
meaning
before the
the
cuts.
state or the community?
I think they're upset. What I've heard from, I haven't heard from South Burlington, Jay. That's interesting because I know that that's happening there. I probably will now. It works that way. But people saying, wait, every measure I look at being discussed in Montpelier, we are there in Chittenden County. Why then are we why then are we cutting when we're already at the scale the state's at seeking for in all the other more rural parts of the state? It's it's just sort of it's an interesting question. I'll say that, without an answer, truly.
I think it's one of those things that's tough for me to kind of think about, honestly, because what they're facing right now are cuts that are not imposed by the state, they're imposed by their local community.
Correct.
Correct, right? And so what we're trying to do is to say, like, right, I think all collectively, so it's not just kind of the governor's administration or the legislature, it's all of us. How do we really think about how we sustain a system so that there is quality, right? That's requiring us to operate a little
Yep.
differently. That's the challenge. And I think communities are demanding things to change, but they're what we're seeing is that they're happening in really different ways across the state. And I think we all share a concern around the impact on programming and opportunities for kids. So it's tough. We're at a really, I think, hard inflection point.
Yeah.
One of the
So anyway,
one of the
we're
big-
maybe a little bit afield.
we are
Yeah.
probably, but I think it's okay. One of the big issues that we have, I know you both know this, but the benefits and compensation for employees across the state varies drastically. So
Obviously.
where I'm sitting right now, Mondays I try to work from home, and I'm sitting up where I used to be superintendent for a long time, and we pay people, everybody, principals, teachers, superintendents, a lot less than
Yeah.
what they're paid in Chittenden County.
That's
So
right.
we get to say we're low spending, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we're providing lots of opportunities for kids.
Right.
So some type of equalization there is important. And I think the other thing, and this is before you got here, Zoe, when we passed 127 was full of good intent. It really was. And the
And
idea
best
behind that,
practices. Yeah.
yeah. And the bottom line, what happened was the way that it was written, there was an opportunity for school districts to raise their spending by about 10%. And people thought only the places that needed the most did it. Well, just about everybody did it because they realized that the number of the next year was going to start from there. And so
Right.
any business manager worth their salt at all was making sure that they made an increase because they realized that was going to be their new normal. And it's not a fault of anybody. The way it got through Ways and Means, and nobody really realized it till it was too late. And then it helped lead us to that situation last year where we had such a high, I mean, we lost ESSER funds. We had, again, record health care cost. And then we had everybody increasing their budget because they thought that was this frugal thing, not the frugal thing, the prudent thing to do
Yeah.
going forward. We've never had a year like last year where that many percentage of budgets go down. Typically, overall, Vermont votes yes to their budgets. The problem in terms of equity is there are certain places that always vote no. Like Slate Valley is a good example.
Yeah.
It's
I think they had
Albert,
another 500,000 on their second vote they cut. Yeah.
and that's just hurting kids. So I think a lot
No,
of what
that's
you're
right.
saying is really true. The nuance is how do we get there? And I think 5 district plan, I've said this before, I think makes no sense. It's way too big. But I also know that was a conversation starter as much as anything else. So what is the real right way to get to scale? And to
Yeah.
Jeff's comment about teachers signing up for jobs, when I was superintendent of Essex, we had a third grade job open. We had 250 applicants. 250. That wasn't that long ago. It was 2005. And now
Wow.
even a place like Essex is lucky to get like 20 applicants. Part of that is not Vermont. Part of that is across the nation. We have half the teachers coming out
Yeah.
because the field is not as, people are feeling like the field's not respected and people are less likely to become teachers. That's just the reality. We used to have education programs at all of our colleges, and now we only have them in a few places. So that's across the nation. That's also happened. And the other thing is
I
housing.
actually think that's a piece missing from both the governor's proposal and the House's proposal, right? And I think what was part of the literacy bill is an intentionality around working with the higher ed partners. I actually think we should make note of this because it is a bigger issue. Yeah.
Yeah, so important. If we could get really, really clear on what the expectations are and the support that people need in pre-service, because as you know, across the country, 50% of the teachers leave in the first 5 years, almost 50%. In Vermont, that's also true. And that's
Yeah.
hard.
But that's been true forever though, Jay.
I know it has. We got to find a way to make that better though.
I
And then the
agree.
last thing I'll say is the housing piece. Jeff mentioned teachers. Do you know Kobe Snellenberger? Either one of you? He's my
No.
principal at Edmonds Elementary School. He and his wife have been here for a year. She's like a nurse or something. They've been here for a year, and they're going to go back to Arkansas because they can't afford to live here. He said, we can't find a house that we can afford to buy close enough to Burlington on what I make. And he said, we don't want to be renters. So we're losing a principal, for that
Yeah.
same thing. It's scary.
Right. A couple months ago, a month or two ago, whatever it was, had a regional meeting with my counterparts from around the Northeast, essentially. And the person from Massachusetts said, Massachusetts, big state, graduated last year 6 special educators teachers. That's it. Now,
No.
out of all their schools and, programs in the state,
It
6
can't be wrong. I hope it's not right.
just special educators.
How can it be? It's like the mecca of universities in Massachusetts.
But my point is, I know that literacy, they're talking about, working with higher ed. The problem is kids aren't going into it.
That is
Right?
true across the country. That's a huge
You
problem.
can't, I mean, it's great to work with them. I'm not saying you shouldn't. It just, if you're not, nobody's going into it, you can't, there's nobody with whom to work.
Yeah, so it's really enticing young people to pursue a career in education.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and I, I'm, we've made teaching less like a profession
Right.
over the last 25 years. We really have. Um, and it's just sort of, get up there and teach the curriculum. Don't think, just teach. And you miss that sort of one-on-one engagement with students. That's been reduced over the last 25 years, particularly after No Child Left Behind.
Yeah.
And that was a bipartisan bill. I'm not being critical of either party, both parties, frankly. It systematized, it routinized what we expect of teachers in front of a classroom. And I think students now see that. And if you're graduating, you're not looking in front of a class and seeing your teacher as being a professional that you aspire to.
Yeah.
What you see is, mega millionaires and billionaires, sports athletes, entertainment, and they always have, but there's got to be a job for some people like me, the regular Joes.
I think you're pointing to some unintended consequences, right? So you're No Child Left Behind. The intent was to reduce the inequity, right? But
Right.
I think there's unintended consequences of that everyone has really felt, and I think has been felt very strongly here in Vermont. And so part of what I believe we need to contemplate with any policy that moves forward this session is how do we have short evaluation cycles? We really have to be able to evaluate impact and course correct as a state. And so that's a hard thing to do because policy is a hard thing to shift, and you don't want to make a change too early that is going to kind of disrupt the delivery. But I really want us to be mindful of that. Like, no bill that passes this session is going to be perfect, right? And I think we all have to acknowledge that. So how do we build it in where we're evaluating, is this achieving the intended outcome, yes or no? And what are the mechanisms for us to make refinements as we move forward? Again, like, to get to the shared goals, I think we're really there on the shared goals. The questions are how to get there, because there's so many questions around like how it's going to be operationalized and what the unintended consequences are going to be that frankly I don't think we could fully enumerate, though we should do to the greatest extent possible. But it's just a point that I don't feel like we've talked about as much, that will be important to avoid unintended outcomes.
Hey, how do we put something in here for step 3, measure benefits and burdens? Because we don't want Maureen to
Oh,
yell at us.
we've got
Yeah.
2 minutes. Go.
Yeah, I know. We've talked a lot about stuff, but what do we think we should add in here just to have into the document itself? I mean, both of you, all three of us have talked about things that relate to this. How does the proposed policy seek to enhance services and or reduce disparities to underrepresented or underserved communities? Well, we're trying to make the funding be more equitable so that there are more resources for underrepresented communities, right?
More equitable, ensure access to student opportunities for a well-rounded education, including, advanced coursework and CTE and electives and clubs, and we want them to have that rich
Right.
experience. I think we talked about the teacher pay equity and teacher support, I would say. So I think about it as pay and support, right? That's what I heard a lot. I'm sure you're hearing this, Jeff, is that, because there's a higher acuity of needs of our students, they also need more support from behavior specialists and reading coaches and others, right? And
Right.
so it's pay and support, it's that whole culture.
And the other, I'll just add to that because I think that's really important, but it's an indication of the adults in the state, or I'll just keep it in the state, but I could nationally. adults need tending and nurturing and in some level. And so we need to make sure that we support the adults in the building too, because when adults are not well,
True.
they won't be able to respond well to students.
Yeah, you have to have that whole culture. Absolutely.
So
The
yeah,
the other benefit, I think that there's greater community benefits as well. Like when our schools are thriving, our communities are thriving.
I know I missed stuff too. We're getting moved back to me.
we're getting moved
We're
back.
getting moved
I'm
back in 10 seconds. You did
It is
it.
what it
You
is.
did it, Jay.
well done. I got to hop. I got to go to another thing and I got to get
All
there.
right,
So
Jeff. Good to
All right,
see
see
you.
you.
thank you all.